The Attorney General has a long and steep hill to climb and not a lot of time to win this election. And Rob, did he avail himself well in this interview? And I ask you that under this idea. Gwyneth asked him straight up, can you win? And he said, look, it's within hailing distance, and quoted that the polls that he has seen was within 5 percentage points. And he's clearly not including the Albuquerque Journal polls.
Right,
so,
and
you know.
yeah, right. And there was another poll where I think he was down by 13. The other thing that struck me was he said, with everything that's working against us, we're still in striking distance.
Right.
Well, everything working against you, a lot of these things have been self-inflicted. He's gone through three different campaign managers in this time, so that's one thing. The other thing too is that in politics, well, they say that generally speaking that facts are stubborn things. In politics, polls are stubborn things, and if you're down by double digits in at least two very respectable polls, it's not just the polls that are the problem, it's what happens after the polls are released. Right. And that means there's only a limited number of dollars if you're a Democrat who's got some money and you want to spend your money wisely and have some impact in November. I think a lot of Democrats across the state are saying to themselves, if I only have a limited amount of money, maybe it's better spent on things like supporting Democrats so they don't lose the House. And I think those are some of the problems, some of the major problems that Attorney General King's face.
Sure. Representative, did you hear anything in Governor King's response to the interview that says to you he understands the game, the situation as it's being played, as Rob described it, and did you hear an aggressiveness about closing that gap here in the last little bit of time? Did anything strike you that way?
No. Not at all. Yeah. And it was so, having been a candidate, and when the polls go against you, I mean, this is a desperate place to be.
Sure.
It's painful. And so the Attorney General has a number of issues that are truly going against him. As the AG, he has an unremarkable record of having not taken action. His message is not coherent. Right. And one of the things that I really like about good candidates is they actually answer the question. What I heard here were canned answers. I'm tired of hearing that. But even those canned answers, there was no message there. I can't tell you what he's going to do for me that will make my life better. And as a candidate, you have to do that. And so now he's down to moving the needle. And 13 points, 15 points, 30 days out, it is hard to do that unless you have a lot of money, and he doesn't.
Absolutely. You know, what struck me, Laura, was the similarity to the debate, using finger quotes, that NIAP hosted between the governor and Gary King, and the interview here with Gwyneth. There was a similarity with Mr. King on his point of view, his outlook on what things that need fixing, things that are. I didn't hear the vigor. I'm curious what struck you? Was there a vigor here about wanting to fix things and move things forward in our state?
So it's interesting. I mean, I think that it is important anytime you're evaluating a candidate, you have to be able to answer that question.
Sure.
As the representative has said about what he's going to do for me. And for me personally, I know what, you know, I have no doubt that there's a big difference, and I care about the environmental issues.
Sure.
So, you know, there was sort of a discussion somewhat about some of the legacy issues of even as far back as his father on environmental issues. But I know that he's definitely got the right interest that I care about. So I think this comes down to really—
There's a track record there with the environmental stuff, for
right,
sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that's something I deeply care about, and I think a lot of New Mexicans do.
Right.
It's going to be about turnout in this one. And it's interesting because usually with turnout, you have, and that's election turnout, which is expanded now, not just election day. Now it also includes absentee ballots as well as early voting. So it extends that get out the vote time period. But one of the interesting things is you usually have the top of the ticket pulling other people to the polls so that people down ballot win. In this case, it seems to be a little bit reversed. You have a lot of really strong efforts happening for the House races. There's a lot of House races that are up for grabs. So you have a huge push of people getting their supporters out. And then Udall also, you know, has a huge push. So you've got those two factors, I think, helping King as well. But in terms of having people come out just for King, I think that's going to be a little bit tougher. And not having the money to do that makes it a huge issue.
Very hard.
Right.
Very hard.
At this stage of the game, I have to think the money cycle, speaking of which, I was thinking about this watching the interview, has to slow down quite a bit. And there's only so much money I would imagine he would personally be willing to put into this kind of race with 15 points down or 5 points down, depending on your point of view. What can he do to close a gap like this without the money you need to be able to spend on television and such? Is there anything out there he could be saying or doing in your view?
I think Laura's right. I mean, we're in the voter turnout stage,
Okay.
and usually that is a party affair.
Okay.
So that the entire Democratic Party wages a coordinated campaign to get out the vote, and get out the vote across the board. It helps when you have a flashy candidate at the top of the ticket.
Sure.
But I think what you saw in that interview was you saw a public servant, you saw a workhorse, you saw somebody that did have a firm grasp of these stubborn facts, and had the issue been about, or had the interview been about those issues rather than just about the poll, I think he would have come off a lot better. I've never seen an interview where the interviewer in a race asks, "What are you going to do after you lose?"
Right. That's
Well,
good.
yeah.
Please.
But also, I mean, with Senator Feldman, you would think that a seasoned politician, regardless of questions are being answered, you've got some talking points that you want to get to.
Yeah.
So, but he never, and you know, and Janice talked about this. I mean, the economy is struggling, and beyond saying, well, let's tap the land grant permanent fund, I think if you're the average person who, you know, let's say you're not a Democrat or Republican and you want to hear a persuasive argument, I didn't hear that in that interview.
Yeah,
To
it is
raise
about
the minimum
persuasion,
wage.
isn't it? Yeah.
He wanted to raise the minimum wage, and he wanted to focus on small businesses. And if every small business added one person with a 10 employee, that would be a 10% increase.
But he never ever, you know, the one, and I think lots of us are listening for this, is where is the link that tells me how he is going to do that? I want, you know, and he talked a little bit about taxes. I love to talk taxes. I never heard any how. I never even heard the what. And you know what's sad is that I know he knows. I know he knows.
I think that, you know, an interesting thing is I think with Gary King, there's people who really are very good at running for office. And some of those people scare me because they're not that great at governing.
Good point.
Gary's different in that he's so knowledgeable. He really has a really deep
That's right.
knowledge of policy. He's very, you know, he's well educated. On a technical level, you know, I talk about the environmental issues. He's got a PhD in chemistry. He
Right.
really understands that at a very basic level. But in terms of the politicking, what you would want to see as
The
the
retail,
slogan,
yeah.
that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, you know, we live in such a soundbite kind of world. You have to have those top three things and then keep hammering it away for people to get it.
I agree. Next, we go on the clock.